Hey, Jeff here. So when I'm recording this, we have a Dialogue Dash coming up. Dialogue Dash is our 80-day program. It starts on October 1st, this time in 2024, and it'll go all the way through the second week in December. And I've talked about the Dash on episodes before of the Dialogue Doctor, so today I'm just going to focus on one aspect of it. We offer you a massive amount of support during the Dash, and the goal is during the month of November, you can get as much work done as possible. So whether you're editing an existing work in progress or you're starting a new book and you're just trying to write as many words as you can, during the Dash, we're going to support you. So we strategize the entire month of October. We plan, we work together, we hold webinars, all that kind of stuff. And then in November, we move to daily encouragement videos. We're in a Slack channel together. We're holding some competitions that are going to inspire you. And we're also doing office hours. So that happens in October and November. So what office hours are each a dialogue doctor coach takes an hour of the week. I usually do, like last Dash, I think I did 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern time on Mondays. JP did like 5 a.m. Wednesdays Eastern time, and Laura did like 9 p.m. Thursdays Eastern time. The reason we break it up like that is because there's a ton of people in the Dash that do the Dash with us, and they come from all different time zones, right? Like so many people come from we have a lot of UK dialoguers. We got a ton of European dialoguers, and we've got a bunch of people even from like New Zealand and Australia. And of course, we're based in the States. We got a bunch of Canadian. I don't want to leave anybody out. We got people all over the world. So we spread out the time zones. And a lot of times when I say we do office hours, people don't know what I mean. So I wanted to today show you what an office hour is. So what an office hour is one of the coaches comes on, and any writer with questions come in, and they just ask their questions. And then as a community, right, like I as the coach may not have the answer, but what's beautiful about office hours is that there's all these other writers there. So as a community, we all sit down and we brainstorm, we talk together, and we figure out kind of what's the best way to solve this problem, or what are suggestions around solving this problem. Or sometimes you don't even need your problem solved, you just need to talk it out. So that's what office hours are for. There's no set agenda. It's whatever people show up with. Now, I can't show you an office hour from the Dash because those are private for because people in the Dash were talking about their own work, and I don't want to share their work. So what we're going to show you is an office hour that Laura held just for anybody from the Dialogue Doctor community to come up to. I think she had 5 slots, and she was like, "Hey, anybody who wants to sign up for this can sign up." We told them in advance we're going to use it as a podcast episode, so they know. But this is what an office hour is like. And there's a couple things I want you to notice. One, how everybody has different questions as an author. But everybody on the call has thought that question at some point in time or heard that question at some point in time. And this is why the Dash is awesome, right? Because you don't have to suffer alone as a writer. We're all having the same struggles. So what's great about getting in a community like the Dash, when you're going to sprint in November and get as many words as possible, is that you find that other authors have common struggle, which means some of us have already come through what you're doing and are going to be able to help. Some of us are behind in different areas from where you are, and you'll be able to help them. And it's just a beautiful give and take of an author community. So what you're going to see today is an office hour that Laura held with 4 different authors that I thought was really great. So enjoy. And if you want to sign up for the Dash, dialoguedoctor.com, find the Dash in the menu, or dialoguedoctor.teachable.com. You can also sign up for the Dash there. All right. Thanks, y'all. Enjoy the office hour.
Hi, everyone. I am Laura Humm. I'm one of the Dialogue Doctor coaches, and I am so excited to be here with a group of authors doing an office hour. Office hours are something that are kind of new to us in the Dialogue Doctor community. It's an opportunity for us to get different authors together to talk about questions they have about writing, or share their stories and ideas with one another. So I'm very lucky to have 4 authors here with me today. I'm going to give you each a chance to introduce yourself, and I'm going to do it in the most diplomatic way possible and do it alphabetically by the names that are on your screen. So, Andrea, you want to start with your introductions, please?
Sure. My name's Andrea Willits, and I reside in Franklin, Tennessee. I am a full-time communications director. So I began my so I kind of write for a living. I began my fiction journey about 5 years ago, after just kind of feeling like I just have this longing to express myself using words in a different way than I do in my 9 to 5 job. So for the past 5 years, I have been struggling to finish my first novel. It is a young adult supernatural. It's essentially the kind of book that I like to read, which I don't know what this says about me, but I like to read young adult novels, and I love them to have supernatural elements woven in. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm still struggling to finish this one novel. I'm probably 90,000 words in, but I can't quite bring it home.
I understand the desire to read young adult fiction. I think that there's just something. I had a friend one time say it reminded her of like chewing bubble gum, where it's like it's very relaxing, but it's also like you don't have to give it a lot of thought. So
Yeah.
that's kind of I do enjoy a good young adult. So
It's nice.
welcome. Thanks
Thank
for coming. Faye, you want to tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. I'm Faye and I live in Canada. I have been a dialogue doctor participant for, well, a while now. I am still working on my first novel. So I finished with Laura's kind help the first draft, and now I'm working through kind of getting feedback and working through the second draft and trying to keep it all going while life happens on the outside.
Absolutely. And you've had a lot of life events
Yeah.
recently that have and yet you still continue to write. I love that, for full-time writers, yes, writing is your job, but for people who have full-time jobs and writing is your second job, that's a lot of work. I
Mhm.
definitely applaud that effort. And I can't
Thank
wait
you.
to hear what you're doing with your characters because I'm very passionate about Ruth and her team. So, okay. Sally, you want to tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. I live in Middleton, Wisconsin, and my day job is teaching first graders. So I'm on the home stretch of a school year trying to make it through with these little ones. And I love I love teaching them writing, and I've always kind of liked to dabble in writing and have tried writing a few different kinds of novels, and I learn something new each time. And so that's why I'm here. Learn something new.
Excellent. And what are you writing now?
It's a romance called Getting Over Yesterday.
Ooh, that's exciting. Can't wait to hear more about that. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Saren, did I say that right?
Yeah, close enough. So my name is Saurin. So I'm from the other side of the world, India. Uh, and so first of all, thank you for this opportunity. Really means a lot. I've been writing content since what about 20 years plus now, and I've been dabbling with fiction on and off, script writing, fiction since years now. But it's always been on and off. And during the pandemic, I kind of got serious about writing for myself, instead of just writing for others slash money. But it's been a struggle. Like uh, a lot of people who kind of decide to focus on fiction, all of a sudden, telling a story it does not seem that simple, right? And I've been struggling and struggling. And so the thing that I've mentioned is, so my interest is SFF, so science fiction and fantasy. And just to give a quick example, I'm reading Scalzi's, the Kaizu Preservation Society. Right now, that's a novel. So I can write a short story, but the moment I work on something that's say about 40, 50,000 words, I kind of just go all over the place, and that's been a struggle, ongoing struggle, just how to keep all of it, on one table. And I've been struggling with it for about 5 years now. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
Well, we are glad that you are here. And I think that the journey that you're having of keeping a story that's larger than 50,000 words all in one place with one thread is absolutely something that we all struggle with. And I sometimes struggle with it like as a reader, keeping all the plot points together. So I can't imagine how you all as authors keep the plot points going. So I'm really excited to talk about all the different, we have a couple different genres here, different places in our writing journey. I think this is really going to be fun today. So thanks so much for being here. Now I'm just going to turn it over to you all. Who wants to start? You don't have to go in alphabetical order this time if you don't want to.
I don't mind if you guys are okay with it.
Yep.
Okay. So like I was saying, for instance, just I took the example, it's not necessarily that you should have read the book, but the point is that it has a lot of characters. It's an alternate, Earth, and it has a lot of characters plus a lot of world building. Uh, so, while I'm going through it, it's so much fun, right? But the moment I start reading it as a writer, it kind of overwhelms me, how, like, if I like writing on paper, uh, but then that gives after a point, like, it just gets so confusing because I've got multiple books and or multiple pads, and I really have no way to keep track of it. um, so I've tried going digital, I've tried creating wikis, but every way that I've tried to kind of put it all in one place so that I can keep accessing it and I do not end up uh, messing up timelines or kind of changing a character midway without really any justification. But it's just very overwhelming. So anything beyond 30,000-40,000 words, I just am up till there. I can keep it in my head and I can manage. But anything up beyond that is just frustrating. So I've tried to figure this out. I've spoken to a lot of people, but I really do not have a solution. So I was just hoping maybe you might be able to help.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is really common. When we're learning a new skill, and it sounds like most of us have day jobs and then are also writing, or using writing from our day jobs to move into a new fiction place where you're when you're based in reality, you have like the world surrounding you to be able to help anchor you and orient you to different things. When the characters and the stories are in your head and you're the only one who know them, it makes it even harder because now you have the responsibility of not just telling their stories, but making sure that you are true to the characters that are in your head and in your story. And I really like the way that you talk about how writing on paper feels really good, but yet there's a drawback to writing on paper because I think any of us in the generation that grew up without technology and then had to learn technology a little bit later in life can see the benefits of technology, but also can also remember what it was like to write in a journal by hand or read a book that doesn't have a light inside of it already, right? Like there's something different about that, about the experience of it. For me, I think we're kind of the best generation because we can do the best of both worlds, right? Like I feel like you ask someone who has only ever written on a computer to try to write something by hand, and they're like, what, the stick is supposed to leave marks on this flat thing? Like I'm obviously I'm grossly oversimplifying it, but it's a whole different thing. So my encouragement to you is do the things on paper that feel good on paper and use the computer for the things to help with the organization. That said, I'm also going to say that there are ways for you to be able to organize without using the technology and the digital. Post-it notes for me are like everything, or a big cork board with index cards and push pins. Again, like that old school feel of just like a push pin into a cork board. There's like, and yes, you can still buy cork boards. I bought one recently. So for Your characters. You can put each character on an index card, their name, kind of what their role is, a little bit about their personality, a little bit about their voice on the front. On the back side, you can put a little bit about their journey or their character arc. And then you can have a board just for your characters to kind of help keep them. If you want more of a murder board style, grab some twine or some yarn and use the yarn to like connect the push pins. Jeff talks about engines, anchors, vehicles, and hazards. And we talk about this in the Dialogue Doctor community all the time. Engines being people who take your vehicle characters. Vehicle characters are kind of like point of view characters, the ones that you're going on the journey with who are telling the story. You could use different color index cards for them if you wanted to. I'm big into color, so that might be the direction I would go, but whatever works for you. You could use different color string for the engines that are helping them grow, the anchors who are kind of keeping them from becoming their best selves, and hazards who are just giving them the opportunity to change. So that's a way you could organize your characters in a very visual way without having to just always remember them. As far as like your storyline and your character arcs, if you're writing a one POV character, one POV story, one vehicle character story, you could do the same thing with either post-it notes or index cards, and each scene can have its own card, and then you can tape them up to the wall. Might be hard on a bulletin board. You might be able to do it, but I kind of think of a timeline as being longer, so more like a border around your room. Use a chair rail of post-it notes or index cards. I don't know. But to kind of keep track of the order of your story. And then if you find that you need to move part of your story to a different place, you can pick them up and you can rearrange them and you can kind of see again visually. That's the thing that I like about the pencil and paper type things, is that I can organize things and I can see them visually much more easily than I can see them on a computer. Yes, I can use a spreadsheet to move things around and organize them, but there's something just visual about seeing, especially if you're using like a multi-vehicle, you could put each vehicle's storyline on a different color index card, and then that can kind of help you organize. But let me turn it over to the rest of the group. What are you all using to organize your stories?
Can I turn my computer on? I completely have your index card.
Yes, I love it. The colored post-it notes. Yes.
Yeah, I love the post-its. And for the different POVs, and and each one does have just like a quick synopsis of the scenes in kind of the chapter. And yeah, I did have to like physically move some of them around. And then I wrote a little like paragraph synopsis to attach to it. And then I kind of had to put some days because I was having trouble like how fast is this happening? Where are the days? What makes sense here? So I was having trouble with that. So I did different shaped post-it notes for the days and different colors for the point of view.
Oh, I love that. I love shapes. I have never thought to use shapes. That is fantastic.
And then Scrivener for writing it and moving those around too, moving things around and being willing to put some things in the trash that aren't really in the trash because they're just on the side or someplace else.
Excellent. Faye, you have some experience with Scrivener as well, right?
Yep. Yeah. I use Scrivener mostly for the writing part. For the character organization, I've on and off used spreadsheets. But one thing that might be helpful is to think about if you break your story into the acts, could you keep one act kind of in your head at one point and then have the ending point of the act one be the starting point of act two and kind of segment your story that way? That might be a way that you could just use each section of the story and think about it at once. If keeping it all in your head is what works best for you.
I love that. That's a really smart option. Thank you, Faye. Andrea, you have some thoughts?
Well, I just want to say that Sauron, you're not alone. So right now I was using Ulysses. Um, I've basically tried everything and never really found something that stuck. And right now I'm at Google Docs. So I realized that you can create in Google Docs, you can create like a table of contents so that you can click straight to like the sections. I'm not sure that I would recommend that, but it was kind of the only way that I could get the whole thing in some kind of like linear structure. Actually in a writers group with Sally and like three other women. And whenever they ask me a question, I'll be like, yeah, I kind of can't remember like what that character's name even was. Like I can't remember like what day that was. So I'm really struggling with that too. So I'm like all ears for all of these suggestions.
And yeah, for some writers, having like a style book, or they call it a story Bible, that is like a quick reference for everything, that it holds everything out of context. So it just has, this character does this and this and this, but it's outside your story. So it's a work to set it up, but that's also something that might be helpful.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
You see, the only challenge I have with that is, I like this story I've been kind of working on for the past, what, 4 years plus. Now I've got 3 notebooks. I've got an entire document on the laptop, and there are like literally 5 places in which I've got bits and pieces of the story, and they don't match, right? So the character is called, at of a certain age in this book, and then because I realized that it was not making sense, so I changed it, but I forgot to update it here. So now I'm kind of like, she's 12 in one place, and she's 17 in another place, and she's 28 in the third place, and it's a mess now. So the only thing I can think of now to do is just scrap all of that, which is it just the thought of putting like months and months of work aside, because now I can't put it all together, is just driving me nuts. So, but I can't think of any other way than to just put everything aside and just start from scratch.
So I definitely would not recommend putting it all aside because that can feel really, you put 4 years of work plus into this,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So in that case, if you've got this much of the story already written, then I would say rather than scrapping it all, either digitizing it or organizing it in a way. Again, Post-its. I feel like I am like the champion for Post-its. They have little tabs that you can use to put on like as almost bookmarks. And if you can read through your notebooks, because you have multiple notebooks, and put the story in order the best you can with the little tabs, and then read through the story as if you were a reader, or get an editor or a beta reader to read through it, looking for those things like, I don't understand who this character is. Why is these two characters seem like the same person, but they have different names? Or in this chapter, your character is 12 and 17 over here, and let them help you, or do it yourself. Like figure out the places that don't match together in the story. And then you only have to rewrite those places. You don't have to start all the way from the beginning. But it sounds like now what you actually need is a developmental edit, which is going through the story and figuring out, does my story make sense? Do my characters make sense? Is everybody the same? Is everybody on the same timeline? Am I creating reader burden unexpectedly or unintentionally because I changed the name? When I first edited for Jeff, I wasn't an editor at the time. He's like, hey, will you be a beta reader for me? And I'm like, sure. And I'm reading through the story, and like, he has a character whose name, the name is the same, but the spelling changed like 3 times. And I started to get really, I was like, is this supposed to be a different character? Is this the same? So like I'm like circling it all the way through. So it's definitely a common practice. If Jeff does it, then everybody does it, right? No, Jeff was just my first experience as a writer. Or excuse me, as an editor for a writer. So yeah, I would just say kind of don't feel like you have to put it all away. You don't have to start again, but just knowing where those pieces are is going to take a read. And that actually is a really great thing to do as you're transitioning in your writing anyway, because at some point you're going to have to go back to the beginning and you're going to have to read your story the way a reader is going to experience it. Because what I've noticed is the way we think about writing as writers is very different than the way readers think about stories as readers. So kind of gives you a 2-in-1. Figure out the places where you're already struggling, but also figure out the elements of what you're going to need for your readers. So excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And it sounds like we're all kind of feeling a very similar thing in this. So great. Thank you for bringing it up.
Mhm.
All right. Someone have another question?
I wouldn't mind going next because it might connect because I'm working on structural pieces too. And
Perfect.
I had asked about flashbacks because mine is a second chance romance. I feel like there's an amount of the first chance that I have to include and an amount of the first chance that contributes to their story arc. And it was starting to feel like, is this too complicated? Am I doing something too complicated? At what point does a flashback just need its own chapter? Or is that just, can I structure it both ways, sometimes within scene and sometimes as a whole chapter? Or should I be consistent? Any advice about that?
I love this question. Thank you so much. First of all, second chance romances are very close to my heart. My spouse and I dated in college, and then we went our separate ways. He got married, and lots of fun complications because she was a friend of mine, and it was a whole thing. And then we lost touch with each other. They, sadly for them, fortunately for me, their relationship ended, and then he and I dated, and now we've been married for 11 years or so. I don't know. I don't keep track of time very well. I think it's 11. So second chance romance are like right up my alley. So um, as far as what are like the rules, there are no rules. Part of what the rules are going to be is based off of your author voice. But if you kind of think about the way that people reminisce, sometimes we reminisce in just a flash of a memory. Those are the ones that you can include in the story, in the chapter, in present tense. Then there are times where we actually really stop and we want to tell a story that's happened in the past. That might be either embedded into a current chapter, or it could be a standalone chapter, depending on how long the story is. Then you have these moments where you just stop and remember something. You're not necessarily sharing it with anybody else. You want to go back to that feeling, whether good or bad, and you just want to spend some time in it. Those are the places in your story where it makes sense to have it be a standalone chapter. When you write those moments of reflection, or that I'm telling the whole story to someone else, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to think about it in the way of, am I remembering it as if I were there? Or am I remembering what it was like through the lens of what I know now? So, for example, in a second chance romance, one of your characters may be remembering what the first chance looked like based off of what they know about the person now. That telling of the story is going to feel very different because their expectations of what happened in the moment, their understanding of when he said that thing that was so hurtful to me all those years ago, I now know it was because of all of these other things, right? So that understanding of who the person is now, of the things that happened in between, are very different than, he said this thing to me and it hurt me so badly, and I'm just stuck in that pain. So there are different ways to both structure the flashback and for your character to interpret the flashback. And they all work in any combination with one another. You can use a reflection or a reliving. That's what I'll call those two. in any of those, like just a flash of a moment or a feeling in a retelling of a story or a reliving of a story, but I just use reliving twice. So I'll figure out different language for it for that. But yeah, they can kind of work in combination with each other.
Wow, that's really helpful.
Sure.
And then the transitions, any suggestions about transitioning from even from one chapter to another chapter or from present to past?
Yeah, so I find that if you're doing just a flash of a moment, the emotional element is the key part to it. The time of it doesn't matter as much because it's about like the feeling that you want. So if it's just like one line, one memory, one flash, this reminds me of when can be a really good transition into it. It doesn't need to be on January the 2nd of 1985 when we were blah, blah, blah in this place, right? You don't need all of those details because it's just a moment, it's just a feeling. When you're doing the telling of a story, like to a friend or a therapist or whatever, or even having the two of them have a conversation with each other about what it was like the first time they were together, then you're going to want the details to come out in dialogue in the same way you would tell your friend a story. Like, okay, so back in 95, I don't know why I'm stuck in 95 today, but in 95, I must be all the post-it note and the index card talk. Anyway, so back in 95 when this happened, blah blah blah, right? Like you set the stage when you're telling a story so that the other people know what the story is like. And because you're already in dialogue, it feels really natural to put that in dialogue. When you're doing a whole scene that's a flashback, that's the one that I find is the trickiest because you can use like titles and headers at the top to, identify the page, but you can't guarantee that your readers are going to read them. I will say that I almost never read anything before the first paragraph. Like I know a lot of authors like will put a quote or something at the top. I know how much love and attention you all put into those, but I'm just not reading them. I'm right into the story. So for me, like having those as a reference point when I'm like two paragraphs in and I'm like, wait, I don't think this is on the same timeline. I can jump up and I can just take a look. But personally, as a reader, I like it when an author can give me context for what's happening in a way that I don't actually have to think about it. I just know where I am. And if you think about this, like sitcoms do this all the time. They're about to change the location of where they are, and they just give you like a 3-second picture of the location of where, like usually it's like the building where this is happening. I know Friends used to do it when they were about to be in one of the apartments. It was like the apartment building. Seinfeld does it. I know more of them do it. I just can't think of any others right now. But like finding a way to tell the story in a way that like either the scene is telling you or I know some authors are like, well, there's like a big event that happened on that day. I can use that. Like my two characters can be talking about this event that just happened. Like everybody knows that the again 96 Olympics were held in Atlanta, right? Like so we can be talking about that. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to readjust my timeline and get back into the 21st century here. Anyway, but yes, that's like if you can find ways in the dialogue or in the prose that surround the dialogue to give your readers that understanding of where you're existing in place and time. The other thing is, especially if you're using like language trends, using language trends from now versus then, like thinking about the way people talked, because language changes in the same way that like fashion changes. The things that we talk about can be, if you can bring those into the dialogue or the prose to help orient the timeline, that can always also be helpful. So, all right, I've talked a lot. Other authors, thoughts, ideas? Have you written flashbacks? Have you read flashbacks that you love? Go.
If it's a flashback, and I don't notice the transition, that seems to be the one that is the most natural most of the time. But if I look back at it and reread it, I can see where the author just very subtly hinted that we were changing into the back. But if I read one where there are a lot of very clunky grammatical ways to try, you know how they use like the past perfect tense, things like that. I find that can be jarring.
Okay.
Thank you, Faye, for bringing that up because it's not something that I would have thought to articulate, but you're absolutely right. When you're reading and all of a sudden you're like used to reading one thing and now you're reading something different, it does, as a reader, feel very jarring. Thank you for bringing that up.
But I think if it's just used in the first sentence or two, it can get the reader there, but then you don't have to keep doing it. Do you
Hmm.
know what I mean?
Okay.
It's like your transition sentence, and then you go right back into present tense or past tense. Yeah, nice. I like that.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Andrea Saren, sorry, I pronounced it wrong again. Saren, any thoughts on that? Flashbacks?
Uh, Honestly, personally, as in like, I'm not really a big fan of flashbacks because it kind of throws me out of the story.
Mm.
But I know, and especially when it comes to fantasy and science fiction, rather than just kind of, there's always this other character who's a newbie who's kind of brought in to kind of help, everyone get oriented, trope. So I've, I've, like I said, it's just my personal, perspective that I, avoid using flashbacks as much as possible. So honestly, it does not mean that, flashbacks don't work. It just don't work for me. So I tried avoiding them. So the way, like for instance, one of the stories that I had worked on, just short story. Uh, what I did was I had to bring in so this is based on another planet, and the characters from proper Earth, Moon, Luna, the Moon, and then escapes to this planet. So I had to bring in something about why was he there. So it's a race, and he's just reminiscing about how and it's a race where he's very likely to die. The stakes are such, and so he's just kind of thinking how he got into the soup, and the race is about to start, and he just keeps, it's like like the end of life kind of flashbacks. So he's kind of just thinking about how he got in here, right? So the flashback is not for the audience as much as for the character. So the character is thinking about how he was on the moon, and what a series of stupid mistakes and choices he made that got him here, and he's just thinking about it because it's like within the next 10-15 minutes or so he's probably going to die. So I tried playing with that. I'm not sure how successful that was, but since it was a flashback, except for that, it was him talking to himself and to his best friend.
That's super helpful for me. I am also I'm a bit clumsy with the flashback. So, Sally knows this. The pacing of my work in progress has been very frenetic from the beginning. Like it just is kind of like this. Um, and somebody said like, well, even like in music, you need rests, like you need kind of those pauses. Otherwise, it's like a wall of sound. And so I
Hmm.
feel like all I had was just like this wall of action. So what I did is like the most obvious thing you could do is I started alternating chapters, like present tense, flashback. And that was going to be one of my questions. Like, is that just like so predictable and so like I don't know, like, do people even do that anymore? And I like what you shared, Sauron, about the reflection, where it's kind of for the sake of the character, and he's kind of reminiscing or thinking about something that happened. I'm able to do that, but if it's like I'm taking you back to like a scene from another, stage of his life, I'm not really able to do that unless I actually like have a clean break and start another chapter.
So when you're talking about a story like that, you're actually talking about telling two different timelines that wouldn't necessarily constitute a flashback. So I think about, and again, this is like, I'm sure that writers and authors who have actually studied this can give you a much more articulate version of this. But for me, a flashback is this is my main timeline. And in order for the main timeline to work, you need to know something that's happened in the past. It's a flashback or it's a memory, right? If you're telling a story that this timeline only works if you understand this whole timeline that came before, so you're telling both stories simultaneously, your first timeline isn't a flashback, it's just another story. It's almost as if you're writing two points of view because your character, while they might be the same person in name and being, not trying to get all like spiritual or religious there, but it's like one being, they're actually a different person. Because how many of us are the same person that we were 20 years ago or whenever your timeline was, right? Like what we're experiencing, what we're growing, what our character arc is going to be different. Our experiences, our understanding, our knowledge are all going to be different. So thinking about them as maybe two different POV characters, the second one that shares the experiences of the first one can kind of help you pull apart those two stories. But the trick is going to be at some point towards the end of the story, the reason that you're telling the 2 points in time have to make sense to the user. It's not just, oh, I'm learning about this and I'm learning about this. And oh, great. Well, that person eventually, right? Like there has to be a reason why you're telling both of the storylines. Otherwise, your reader will get to the end and be like, oh, that was two great stories about two different people, but I don't really understand how they came together. So there will have to be a tie-in chapter. But thinking about that as opposed to thinking about this second, like the opposite chapter as a flashback, thinking about it as a different storyline. And yes, authors still do that. It is still appropriate. Again, I think this is something that goes into author voice and the individual story that you're telling, thinking about it that way, especially if you're going to create a pattern for your readers where you're going to have one chapter in the present, one chapter in the past, one chapter in the present, one chapter in the past, because then the reader comes to expect that. So if you change it up later, it can feel very jarring to the reader. So, and it doesn't have to be 1-to-1, it can be 2 or 3-to-1. Whatever works best for your story. But I would definitely, if you're telling two timelines, think about them as timelines and not as flashbacks.
Okay, that's so helpful.
So,
Thank you.
yeah. Yeah. All right. More about time or something new? You all are in charge. All right.
Okay, well, I'm working on a revision where one of the suggestions I received was to go to just one point of view character for my story. And I had originally drafted it with 3. So one of them I can pull pretty easily. It's the daughter's point of view, so I can actually remove that, and that actually will increase tension in some places. And the other one I'm having a little more trouble with. So it's 2 women. One is the point of view character, and then the other one was a more experienced person who's kind of leading her into this new world. And so it was easy to have her there as a person who taught her everything, but also gave her a bigger perspective on the world. So I'm thinking what I might do with this revision is I have to go through and do a chapter breakdown and mark all the chapters that have to be pulled from the other characters' points of view, and trying to figure out ways to get the information in that I had just given from the other character's point of view. And I'm wondering about adding an epistolary component. She's kind of a middle manager, and part of this is her work. And so I could do it as reports to her boss. And what do you think of that?
So I think there's a lot to unpack there. The first thing that I want to ask you is, so we get a lot of feedback as authors. I'm an editor. I will give you all the feedback you want. I will give you suggestions for what I think your story is missing. I will give you suggestions for what I think you should pull from your story. I will give you suggestions for what your characters should do. They're never good, but they will always help you spark what it is that your characters should be doing. There's going to be just a ton of information coming at you. As the author, it's your job to figure out what you want your story to be. So my question for you, Faye, is the feedback about moving from 3 POVs to 1 POV. What was it about that feedback that made you, as an author who really was excited to write 3 points of view, what made you make the change to be like, no, I really like 1 point of view is the right way to go here?
It was because the character's journey is going to be stronger, and I didn't have a journey for the other characters really. There wasn't
no
a
growth
change,
arc for them.
no growth. So it's either change it so that they have growth arcs and there's actually more going on for them, or pull it back and focus on the one character. And because I'm not that experienced as a writer, I think it's going to be I'm going to learn more if I can strengthen the one character.
Wonderful. Okay. I love that. And thank you for talking us through that, because what I wanted to kind of get to is, if as authors, we're always taking advice immediately without really thinking through the impact, we end up not writing our own stories. We end up writing the stories that other people want. And yes, we should always be thinking about the reader when we're writing, but we shouldn't just be responding to every critique in and of itself without thinking about the larger impact, because then it gets really confusing, because we're making this change over here for this beta reader, and then we're making this change over here for this beta reader, and then we're making this change over here for this beta reader. And then it's like, well, how do I please everybody? And then that's where you as authors really need to be true to your author voice and to the story that you're trying to tell. And Faye, I love the way that you processed through that it actually is going to make you a better writer. It's going to make your story better. It's not just because, hey, one person over here said, and obviously, you trust that person enough to trust their feedback, and that's good, right? Like, so thank you for talking us kind of through your thought process. So then the question is, you had this POV character who was giving the reader information that the reader needed to have in order for the story to actually make sense to them. And now you remove this point of view character. And what do I do? How do I get this information in? So if you're still using like the team briefings as a way to but just changing it from the one person's point of view to now your main vehicle's point of view, a lot of that information can still be presented in the same way, but you're telling it from the perspective of the vehicle who's receiving the information instead of the information, which actually could be a little bit more fun for you in the writing of that, because when you have a character who has all of the information, it becomes hard to write that scene in an interesting way where it doesn't just sound like they're lecturing, versus the person who's receiving the information, they're receiving it at the same time the reader is. So their emotion is, you want that to mimic the emotion that the reader is experiencing. So it can actually be a little bit more fun, because then when the person who's giving the information says something that isn't clear and your reader is going to go, well, wait, I don't understand that, then your vehicle character can be like, wait, before you go on, can you tell me? And get them to ask that question, which is, I always think as a reader, I think is really fun when I have a question and then one of the characters in the story asks the question. I'm like, yes, I know what I'm doing as a reader, right? I just think that there can be something really fun there. The other thing is, if it doesn't make sense for that information to be shared in a briefing. Using conversations between people, like maybe she walks in on the person who had the original POV talking to somebody else and she overhears part of the conversation and she just inserts herself. And they can be like, no, no, this isn't your business. You don't have anything. And then she's just like, no, no, I heard you. Now you have to tell me, right? Like, and this is an example of me giving you really bad ideas that are going to generate good ideas. Right? Like there's these opportunities to find ways to bring the information in. Yes, absolutely, you could do it in a report form. Reading reports and reading newspaper clippings and reading what could be considered supplemental information can feel really good to some readers, but could be really jarring and kind of pulling other readers out of the story. Again, I mentioned a little bit before, I don't read anything that's above like the start of the chapter. I often feel like when there's a letter between people or there's a newspaper clipping or there's a like most of the time I like maybe read 6 or 7 words and then I move forward until I realize that I don't know something and then I go back and I read the thing that I missed. And again, you're not writing for me. There are other readers out there who are anything that you put on the page from your dedication through to your acknowledgments. They're going to read that. And you definitely want to celebrate those readers. But for an inclusive experience, you want to make sure, and maybe it's okay to put the information in 2 different places. Maybe there's a report and then somebody has a conversation about it at a different time. So I definitely think that there are ways to give the same information from different perspectives. And as we're talking about that, my character doesn't have access to, my primary vehicle doesn't have access to all of the information is almost never a good reason to create a multi-POV story. Just to resolve that, there are usually creative ways that authors can find to get that information to the reader without having to create a second point of view character. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, other authors have thoughts or ideas that they want to share so I can stop talking.
I don't know about the reports, but every once in a while in life, it happens that someone accidentally replies all. And sometimes you unfortunately get information that way.
I love that because it does happen. And when it does happen, how many of us scroll all the way to the bottom and be like, what are we talking about here? Instead of going, oh, wait, that's not for me. Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's the cringe moment. You're like, oh, that
Yeah.
I've done that.
Yes. Yes.
In the beginning of email, the default was reply all. That was a
Mm-hmm.
bad default.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I actually like the like the report idea. It just depends how it's crafted. So I like so there was this I forget the name, very bad with names. But this story where basically it was recordings, right? So the entire story is basically a recording that's been sent out from different people. So there is one character from whose point of view the entire story is being told, and it's a first person, and I think it's a he, and he's kind of talking about this is what's happened, and in the middle of that he'd keep pulling in other people's recordings. Right. So
Neat.
it was very interesting because you kind of getting other people's perspectives in their own voice, but ultimately it's filtered through this person's perspective because he's only pulling in what he thinks is essential. So I thought that was quite neat. And so and I think it was quite innovative as well. So, even reports, if they're done, if the character has a very interesting, quirky personality, it'd be fun to read the reports. I'm just saying. But I like the idea actually.
Oh, thank
So
you.
yeah.
See, this is why you need multiple points of view and perspectives, and that you, as the author, need to make the decision. All right. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Does somebody have something else they're itching to talk about?
I wouldn't mind going back and connecting to what you were saying about the multiple timelines when you
Mm,
were talking to Andrea, because I was thinking about, so if I have two POVs, the two that are in the current romance, and then their story that connects, that got them there, it's almost like four characters.
hmm
Kind of what you're saying.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I would do a multi-timeline, multi-POV for
Okay.
romance, because the whole point of romance is to tell two people's love story. If you're telling two people's love story and the stories that didn't work out before, you're drawing away from the timeline of their love story and they're coming together. Especially because a lot of romance is will they, won't they? Um, or it's like, immediate attraction, but all the reasons why they shouldn't be together, right? So to use different timelines to tell that story can be much more complicated for your readers than a single timeline that has flashbacks.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
But the two POV, do you think that's even too much? Like telling some of it from her point of view and some of it from his?
I think that is a great way to tell a story because there's always, three sides to the story. Person one's side, person two side, and then what actually really happened. And I also think that especially in a second chance romance, this idea that like both of them are bringing experiences to the table that they can talk about and telling that story of that conversation from two different points of view can be really fun. Like this idea that, sometimes we can start a chapter from one person's perspective, and then at the critical moment, we switch it to the other person's perspective. That's really a fun thing for the reader because as a reader, we're going on a journey with the vehicle. And if we're seeing both sides of this, we can be like, yes, yes, yes. Wait, but no, come on, right? Like it's fun for us to see kind of both sides of it and know because how many times in our own lives have we wished we have been able to see what's happening with our partner or our potential partner, right? Like I'm here and I'm thinking, why isn't he calling? What's he thinking? Should I call? And then to turn it around and be able to experience it where he's like, oh, should I call? Should I not call? Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't, right? That gives you it to be able to see the other side of it, I think can be really compelling for a reader. So I would say if that's your instinct to write it that way, lean into that. If your instinct was, no, I'm writing this as one POV and you're writing a second POV because someone told you you should write a second POV, like me telling you, yeah, I think it's really great, but it's not something that's like working for you or you're having a really hard time and you're struggling getting the voice right for the second POV, then maybe you do write it in one POV with flashbacks and maybe you don't. But like this is where your strengths as an author are really going to come in and dictate what it is that you write. Because honestly, there's room for all of it.
Mhm.
Anything that you want to write, any way you want to tell a story, there's room for it. So that's not really helpful advice, but
It was good. It was helpful.
follow your dreams. I'll channel my inner JP.
Mhm.
Yeah. So Andrea, you looked like you had a question right there, right as Sally started to ask her question. So
I did. So, as like a first time novelist, How does somebody, especially like I guess in the young adult genre, develop their voice? So I know, if you've read many young adult books, it's like sometimes the characters are super quirky. They have like really kind of outlandish kind of traits, and sometimes I just feel like, how, as an author, how do I develop my voice and develop my characters? And is it the same thing? Like, I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I love this question. And this question is like, I am all about character voice, right? Like anyone who's ever heard me talk on this podcast knows, like, anytime you talk about voice, like, sit back, Laura's going to nerd out on this. So you're welcome. Sorry. I don't know. Feel free to fast forward in the podcast here. You all feel free to, whatever. Okay. So your voice as an author is about your style. Are you dialogue heavy? Are you prose heavy? Are you future tense? Are you past tense? Are you single POV? Are you multi POV? Are you first person POV? Are you third person POV? Are you third person close POV? Are you second person? Right? Like all of those like technical things that don't really feel technical are your voice as an author. If you want to compare it into the art world, like the genre in which you paint or your paintings are classified are part of your voice, but the type of brush, the colors you use, the mediums you use, that's your voice, right? Like you can look at a painting and go, oh, that looks like a Monet or a Van Gogh or, all of the other very famous paintings people who know art can look and see. In the same way, when we read a story, we're like, oh, that's a Stephen King. Oh, that's a Jonathan Mayberry. That's, like a TJ Klune, right? Like whatever, like each author has a voice that is going to come from you. Yes, your editors and your beta readers are going to help you sculpt that voice as you're telling a story, but ultimately you decide how you want your voice to come across. Character voice is very specific to your character, their background, their personality, and their journey. This is where the dialogue daisy comes in, right? The background of the character is the roots, the personality is the stem, the voice is the petals, the voice is like the center, and then the petals are the modulations that are based off of the experiences that are happening, right? The dialogue daisy. Each character is going to have their own voice. Voice is made up of 4 components: words, which can be broken down into what they say and the types of words that they use, so topics and words. Then we have cadence, and that's like the grammatical structure of how the words come out of their mouth. Then you have pacing, and that's like the when they are going to speak. And then you have body language, which is the nonverbal communication. Mm-hmm. And how you turn the dials on each of those different elements of voice are how your character is going to sound and interact with the world around them. Andrea, when you were talking about some YA characters who are a little bit quirky, the quirkiness is coming from either their background or their personality or their experiences, and you are seeing that and getting to know them through their voice. Usually it has to do with the body language they use, the cadence that the author has created for them, or the topics that they talk about, or the words that they use. Sometimes it'll have to do with pacing, but I feel like pacing is one of those things that tends to come more from personality, that might be a little bit quirky, but might not. I would really probably lean into cadence and either words or body language to find like a quirky character. So to kind of go back to your question, are they the same? No, they're not the same. The second part of your question was, how do you develop them? Developing your author voice is going to be based off of what you learn, what you experience, what what you like to do in your writing, going all the way back to the very first question that Sarin asked at the beginning, where it's like, do I write on paper or do I use technology? How do I like balance this out? That's part of your author voice. It's part of your experience. It's part of your journey. That is going to probably be something that you're going to have to learn over time, and it's probably going to develop. And it might change a little bit with the more experience that you have, and as you learn more stuff, and as you work with editors and beta readers, you may decide that your voice is going to change a little bit. And it might change even book to book, story to story. And that's okay too, right? Like we're all growing, we're all evolving. I don't know a lot about art, but I would imagine that the paintings that Monet painted at the end of his career probably looked a little different than the ones at the beginning of his career. That's okay, right? So definitely kind of give yourself some time and some grace to figure out who you are as an author. And kind of, I would say, enjoy that journey, especially if you're doing this as a second career as opposed to your primary writing career. I feel like if your primary income is coming from authorship, well, then that's a very different type of writing, and you may have to change your author voice a little bit in order to ensure that your income is stable, but I don't really know anything about that. So again, if you are listening to this and you have some suggestions, put them in the comments. Okay, so then how do you develop your characters' voices? Character voice can come at any part in your writing story. I told you all I was going to totally nerd out on this, so I apologize, but I guess you're welcome. I don't know. Anyway, okay, so your character voice can be the start of your story, or your character voice can be something that's added in the editing phases of your story. It just depends on how loud your characters are in your head. Sometimes when we see a character, we know everything about them. We know how they dress, we know how they talk, we know who their friends are, we know who they're going to spend time with, we know what their quirks are going to be, we know how much body language they're going to use. We know it all. Other times we have characters where we know their story. We know that they're going to hit all of these different plot points, but we're not really sure what their background is, how they look, how they feel. So you're going to write the story part first, and then you're going to infuse the character in later. I wouldn't recommend going out kind of into publication without infusing the character into it, because those are the stories that, even if the story is good, they tend to not get as much traction because your readers don't connect with the characters quite as much. And then sometimes you have the story where you really, really know the characters and their voice is really loud, but you're not really sure what they're going to do. You just know that there's this really cool person that you want to write about. And then sometimes you struggle with how the plot comes together because you just have this really cool person and they're just doing really cool things. But what do our readers want to read? What cool things do they want to read? And then that's where the struggle is. And then obviously there's like every combination in between. If you are starting from a place where you have a character that is really like clear and loud and you know who they are, I would start by writing using we have a character wheel, which isn't actually a wheel, it's a table, as a free tool on the Dialogue Doctor website. And it lets you talk about the personality of your character, the background that they have, and then how that personality is going to translate into voice. Again, I definitely recommend thinking about all the different elements. What type of words are they going to use? What topics are they going to talk about most? Are they going to be a we character, or are they going to be an I character, right? Like some people are always like I, you, and other people are always like we collectively, right? And it tends to be like their personality, their role can change those things, their education can change those things. So thinking about that, and then thinking about the cadence you want. Are they going to be a tag first character where it's always like they said blah, blah, blah? Or is it always going to be a tag last where it's like blah, 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 they said? Or are you going to have a character who kind of takes up a little bit more space and their tag is going to go to the middle, blah, blah, they said blah, right? Right? Like that's just kind of, and I recommended this, I don't know when they'll air, but I recommended this to someone else. If you're struggling with changing up where all of your dialogue feels like sounds the same, pick two characters and just change where their dialogue tags are going to be so that they're always opposite. So instead of at the end, one is always at the end, one is always at the beginning, and just read the scene to see the difference in moving the tag makes. when we're reading, our brain isn't necessarily thinking about what that means from like a thinking standpoint, but it changes our experience because the person whose tag is at the beginning, we automatically assume is a slower speaker than the person whose tag is at the end because we know who it is before we're putting the person's name to it versus we're hearing it and then we're associating it with a person. So that's a quick, easy trick to change. So thinking about that, thinking about when they're going to speak in the scene, are they going to be the first person to speak? Are they always going to be the last person to speak? Are they going to be the one that speaks the most? Or are they going to be the one that speaks the least? And then you want to think about their body language and how they're using body language to communicate. There's some study, probably multiple studies out there that people way smarter than me have written and conducted about how much percentage of communication is actually verbal versus nonverbal. And it's something crazy, like in maybe even in as high as like the 80 percentile of nonverbal communication being more important than verbal communication. And obviously that includes things like inflection and pitch and all of those things too. But I mean, you can't really put pitch and into your dialogue, but you can put body language into it. So making sure that you're thinking about how body language is part of communication style is going to be really important. So thinking about all of those things before you start writing can help you if that character's voice sounds really loud to you. If you're on the other side of it and you don't really know kind of how your character is going to speak or talk, and you know that the story that they're going to go on, then I would recommend doing all of that same stuff to create your character voice, but do it after the story is already written, because then you already have what the dialogue is supposed to say because you already know the choices that the character is going to make and you know the experiences. And then all you have to do, like it's the easiest thing in the world, right? Is go in and like think about that character. And the way they speak is going to change the dialogue in a conversation, but you can do it like in the microcosm of in this scene, I have to change this voice and then change the other voices to respond to it. But it allows you to focus only on changing the words that someone uses or the pacing or the cadence or the body language without having to worry about, oh, I have to know who this character is and how they're going to respond in this situation. So the good news is wherever you want to infuse that character voice into your story, whether it's at the beginning, during the middle, or at the end in your editing, all of it works. You can still end up having a really great story because of it. But it does require, for most people, it does require work to create those voices unless you already just hear that voice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So sorry, I totally nerded out there.
No, I needed to know every single bit of that.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything that I said that didn't seem clear or that you maybe wanted another example on? No, it was perfect. Awesome. I'll take that. No. All right. So yes, I would say just enjoy your author voice, enjoy your character voices. The other thing I would say, just as like one last, like if voice is something you feel like you're struggling with, as you're talking to people in your everyday life, start listening to how they're speaking and watching how they're speaking because everyone has a very different cadence. I will caution you though, when you start listening to your own voice, it's going to start becoming like the nails on the chalkboard and like listening to yourself on tape. It's like, oh my gosh, do I really sound like that? I have this tendency to like pause in weird places and emphasize weird words when I'm speaking, like words that shouldn't be emphasized in a sentence are the ones that I'm emphasizing instead of the ones that actually require emphasis. And every time I do it, I'm like, cringing because I'm like, oh, I just did it again. I'm trying to stop that. Can I just stop? And I just, right. So like listening for those things, that's what's going to create your quirky characters, Andrea, is being able to watch and see like, oh yeah, that person, when they do it, they really do it. And then being able to bring it onto the page. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So it's a double-edged sword though, because once you see the patterns in the way people talk, you cannot unsee them. So like And then I don't know if you're anything like me, you start mimicking them. Like my spouse does this thing where when he has an idea, he like moves his finger around like this. So now anytime I'm talking to him and I have an idea, I do this. And it's now it just becomes a joke, but you know. Anyway, it can be fun, but it can be a little it can be a lot. So all
I've had
right.
parents tell me that their students are acting like me at home and
Oh,
pretending to play school, and I'm like, oof. That can
uh,
be tough.
imitation is the best form of flattery, though, right?
I hope so.
Excellent. Well, thank you for working so hard to shape our young minds because that's awesome.
My
All right.
pleasure.
Thank you all for sharing your hour with me. I'm going to go ahead and
Thank
turn the
you.
recording off.
All right. I'm back. The office hour is over. In case you missed it, it ended. Come join us in the Dash. Again, we do that during the Dash for the entire month of October, and then again in December we do those 3 times a week. JP does one, I do one, and Laura does one. You can come to any or all of them, but you have to sign up for the Dash. So go to dialogdoctor.com, click on Dash in the menu, or go to dialogdoctor.teachable.com. You can also sign up for the Dialogue Dash there. All right. Thanks, y'all. We'll be back again next week with another episode. Bye.